Jill! Don't scare me.
That's what I was going to say. Aren't you supposed to be going over the first floor, Barry?
Yeah, you're right. But just take a look at this.
The dialogue in the original Resident Evil is pretty consistently funny, but the Jill sandwich line seems to be the most infamous. At least, that's how it seems to me. I was aware of Jill Sandwich and Master of Unlocking for many years, well before I ever played the game. They're still referenced in universe to this day, and if it weren't for these badly written lines and awkward translations, and more on point how the fans embraced them, I honestly believe we wouldn't have the Resident Evil series we have today. Some franchises bury their more embarrassing missteps. Zelda and their CDI games spring to mind, and it ends up having a sort of Streisand effect. Some franchises go too far in the opposite direction, doubling down on these unintentional highlights, thinking they're a sort of golden goose that'll pay out indefinitely. I can't think of any video game examples right now, but Tommy Wiseau's post The Room career is perhaps a decent example of what I mean. Or maybe the Fast and Furious series. That's probably a better example. Actually, I don't know about that one. Resident Evil, on the other hand, occasionally tips its hat to those early moments of silliness, but it never abandons its original intention, its values, its soul, whatever, in order to capitalize on them. The closest the RE series ever came to leaning into the schlock was RE4, and that game's a masterpiece. These moments of brain melting, so bad it's good dialogue that are peppered all throughout the game could almost be seen as microcosms of that nebulous X factor that makes Resident Evil so beloved and memorable. The silliness of the dialogue undercuts the tension, and it's hard for me to articulate exactly what strange alchemy takes place here, but that mix of goofiness and dread doesn't necessarily balance each other out, nor do they come together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Instead, what I feel it does is simply make something wholly unique, something that could never have been consciously created, and something that can't ever truly be replicated. And it's this offbeat combo that makes RE1 so endearing. So, is this episode gonna be entirely about the Jill sandwich moment? No, it's mostly about other shit. This is part 4 of Overthinking Resident Evil. We'll get to the Jill sandwich moment soon, but first let's check out the rooms around it, picking up where we left off in the northeast corridor. There's this weird ad hoc feel to the northeast corridor, like it was grafted onto the back end of the building as an afterthought. It narrowly snakes around and between existing rooms, is strangely disorienting, and has no windows. Wouldn't surprise me at all if plans for this area were originally much different and the hallway was left in its bare-bones state after changes were made late in development. Maybe the bathroom was added last minute and this whole section needed to be reworked under time constraints. Whatever the case, this ad hoc design plays well into the nuclear town theory I've been teasing for the entire series. In fact, much of what we've seen over the past few rooms plays into that theory. There has been a huge lack of aesthetic consistency in the mansion so far. I mean, the dining hall and entrance hall are similar enough. The tea room is different, but not too out of place to raise any eyebrows. But when you factor in the exhibition room, the L-shaped corridor, and now the northeast corridor, a pattern starts to form. A pattern we'll get into in the next episode. For now, let's stay on topic. There isn't a whole lot to say about the design of this room. It's most aesthetically similar to the tea room. Same light fixtures, same, or at least very similar floorboards, same vibe. Both rooms are quite plain and serve more or less the same purpose. I'm not going to try and extrapolate anything from this. I'm sure things like the floorboards and light fixtures are just the developers reusing assets. I will say I appreciate what little aesthetic consistency we get here. It might not seem important, but it's invaluable for creating immersion. There are 2 paintings in this room, one of the mansion and one of a knight on a horse. Unlike the one in the tea room, this painting actually does resemble the Spencer mansion. I talked about that painting in the second episode, but perhaps this painting is of this mansion, whereas the one in the tea room is of the mansion this one is based on. The one of the knight just looks like a landscape painting. I don't know what's up with that. Maybe it was a placeholder image that didn't get changed before development stopped. That lines up with my idea that this area was slapped together, or at least heavily altered late in development. I like the idea that the knight originally could have held some level of significance in the lore, either to the owner of the mansion, Oswald Spencer, or to its architect, George Trevor. There's a room in the mansion where knights in armor are displayed, and it would explain why the special keys we find throughout the game are themed around the knight's armor and equipment. This theory holds a little more water in the remake, but it is what it is. Something else that's more prevalent in the remake is Alfred Hitchcock's influence, though the more I dig, the more I find just how big a role his work played in the shaping of this game. Take the camera work for example. Camera angles in the northeast corridor can be neatly divided into two types: overhead shots and voyeur shots. Overhead shots are pretty versatile and, depending on context, can convey a manner of different things to the viewer. Shots from above can frame their subject as small or weak, giving the illusion of powerlessness. The inverse is true too. Shooting a subject from a low angle, looking up, can lend the subject an air of intimidation and power. They can be intimate or convey a sense of scale. Shots from above can also be good for helping the player orient themselves, but in this case it comes at a cost. The trade-off for giving the player a good sense of spatial awareness is that they can't see down the hall, so while they might know where they stand, they're unsure as to what they're up against. Another parallel with the tea room. And it works. There are no enemies in this room, for now at least, yet the tension still simmers along. It's all in the shots and sound design. The player's mind does the rest. Best horror example I can find of this shot is in Hitchcock's Psycho, where it's used to great effect. Something Hitchcock apparently does with overhead shots is save them for moments of heightened tension. I'm not familiar enough with his work to really comment on that, but if that's true, the case could be made that that particular technique is simultaneously rehashed and subverted in this game. Psycho and Hitchcock in general are also great examples of the voyeur shot. Voyeur shots come in a few different shapes and sizes. Sometimes third person, usually first person. Sometimes they're through the branches of the tree or over the top of the shrub the killer is hiding behind. Sometimes they're through a half-open door or a gap in the blinds. Sometimes it's the killer observing their next victim in a vulnerable state. Sometimes it's the would-be victim accidentally overhearing their attacker's intentions. The thing that unifies them all is this feeling that you're not supposed to be seeing what you're seeing. Regardless of context, there's a feeling of unease that accompanies this shot. The voyeur shot's objectively less versatile than the overhead. It serves a very specific purpose, but it serves it well. It gives the player a look down the various twists and turns of the corridor, but still leaves the final turn hidden, forcing the player to once again step into the unknown. It mirrors the tea room again here, as well as the L-shaped corridor, and that combination of both voyeur angle and necessitating the player walk into the background keeps the tension from letting up. Funny enough, there's a brilliant voyeur shot in the remake's version of this room that's absent from the original too. In the northeast corridor, the camera angles alternate between keeping it tight on the player and giving them a view of what's ahead, and pulling back at the expense of their ability to see what potential dangers await them. I've got to say, there was never a lot they could have done with the camera work in this room, but they managed to achieve that balance about as well as you could ask of them. The only camera angle not to fit into either category is when you first enter the room. This angle is such an interesting choice. No one's expecting their character to be so close right off the bat, and it's weirdly confronting. The tight angle gives the player virtually no information about the room they're in, and they're forced to rely on sound, or the lack of it, for any hints as to what they're walking into. After the L-shaped corridor, it's not unfair to assume the player's nerves might be a bit frayed. The lesson the player learned in the previous room, that just because a room looks safe doesn't mean that it is still fresh in their minds. They'd move through the northeast corridor with trepidation, awaiting a jump scare that never comes. That in itself is just another tool in the horror toolbox, I guess, but I don't think that's the main focus of this room. At first glance, this room might not serve any real purpose, and maybe that's the case. I talk about peaks and valleys a lot in the Donkey Kong series, maybe this one too, I can't remember, but I'd say it's relevant here. The odd shape of the northeast corridor, with its many twists and turns, could be bad design with an in-universe explanation, but whatever the case, it expertly controls the pacing of the player's experience. It forces them to slow down and experience a bit of nothing, simultaneously giving them a chance to calm down while also ratcheting up the tension for the next scare. I have spent a ridiculous amount of time talking about what could be the most boring room in the game, so let's move the fuck on. There are two doors close to where you enter the corridor. One is locked for now, the other leads to the bathroom. You know, I get that it's a video game and all, but it kind of bugs me that there's only one bathroom in the entire mansion. Come to think of it, there's only 2 bedrooms, and neither are the master bedroom. They're just sort of there. The bedroom on the second floor is not exactly close, but the other one's on the whole other side of the building. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, needing to go. It's cold, the floor's fucking marble for half the journey, Imagine waking up and it's an emergency. The kind where you're doubled over from cramps and every step is a struggle. God damn. Not as bad as the Raccoon City police station, I guess. I do have a theory about the lack of bathrooms and the placement of this one, and I know you're probably sick of hearing me say this, but it's gonna have to wait. Not too long, just until the next episode. Trust me, it'll all make more sense then. For now, let's take a look at the bathroom. I actually love the design of this room. I don't know why. I think it's because it reminds me of Grim Fandango. It doesn't feel consistent with any of the mansion we've seen so far, though it does match some areas we'll see later. Now, as much as I love it, that doesn't mean there isn't something off about the design of this room. Its placement in the mansion for starters, but beyond that, it feels wrong somehow. Like it was designed by someone who didn't really know what bathrooms were. That's a bad sentence, but you get me. It's a nice looking room, but there's no ventilation, no windows, just a fan. And for some reason, there's not one, but 2 expensive looking rugs on the floor. That's just begging for mold. Whether it's some rich dude's house or a workplace in disguise, the standards should be much higher. I really don't know how to string these next points together in a way that makes sense, so I'm not gonna try. It wouldn't surprise me if originally this room was meant to be in a different spot in the mansion. This corner here comes in a bit, as if making space for something on the other side of the wall, but outside we see there's no reason for it to be there. There's also this mark on the wall by the toilet, as though a hole was recently plastered over. I doubt it's anything. Maybe the light fixture was originally there and was later moved a bit further into the room. The pictures on the wall seem to be of a bowl of fruit or veggies and Mount Rushmore. You can't really interact with them, so I don't know. And finally, while the camera angles don't really reflect this, the tub itself could be a reference to Psycho. I don't really feel good about that one, it's a bit of a stretch. Some versions of this room have a zombie, some pistol ammo, and a small key, but in Jill's normal campaign, the room is empty. I can't for the life of me figure out what the point of this room is. It doesn't help flesh out the lore or move the story along, and it doesn't really teach the player anything gameplay wise. Then again, I suppose it doesn't have to. Alright, let's get the fuck out of here. The suspended ceiling room is, without a doubt, the most insane area in the East Wing. In fact, it could just be the craziest room in the entire mansion. There are some pretty nuts rooms that we'll dive into in the future, so that's up for debate. For now, let's take a look at this one. When you first walk in, it's eerily silent and feels simultaneously spacious and claustrophobic. The high ceiling and camera angles give the player the impression of space, but the shape of the room, the lack of windows or any distinguishable features for that matter, creates this feeling of being trapped. There's an uneasiness about this room that the player picks up on subconsciously. You can tell right away that there's nothing for you here, but still you're made to feel like you're missing something. At least that's how I felt the first time I stepped into this room. And you kinda leave it there. You go through the door to the next room and that feeling just kind of lingers, unanswered. We're gonna go into what your subconscious might have been picking up on in a moment, but right now I just want to look at the room itself. Aesthetically, it calls back to the entrance and dining halls, with all that white marble and deep red highlights. Unlike those 2 rooms, there is a sort of grimy feel to this one. You can see in parts that the marble appears to be cracked, and there are what look to be stains running down the walls from the ceiling, though they could also be scratches, given the nature of the room. I think everyone can be forgiven for missing this, but those marks, whether they're scratches or gore stains, tip the player off as to the purpose of the room. Speaking of purpose, I really don't know what purpose this room could theoretically serve. Like if they were to try and pass it off as a relatively normal room. Maybe artworks were hung in here or a sculpture was displayed or something. If anyone's got any ideas, please let me know in the comments. Once when I was a kid, I was playing hide and seek at a friend's house, and tripped as I ran down the stairs. As I fell against the wall on the landing, it gave way and I fell into a hidden room. It was this small wine cellar. The walls were all rough, unpainted concrete, and there were a couple of yellow lights built into the wall at roughly knee height. My friend didn't find me because he didn't know the room even existed. Whenever I step into the parlor, I'm reminded of that time. I don't know why, the parlor looks nothing like that secret wine cellar I found by accident. What they do have in common is that same cozy feeling. I can't really word it any better than that, but to me, the parlor feels like an open secret. It's not hidden, but it is sequestered away, with the suspended ceiling room serving as a sort of buffer between it and the rest of the mansion. It feels removed. It almost feels safe to me. Compared to, say, Victorian or antebellum era parlours, this one feels a bit unfinished. What's there, the wallpaper, the mantle, the rug, the pictures, they capture the vibe fairly well. My biggest issue is that it feels a bit empty. There are only 2 pictures on the wall, and they're both in one corner, right next to each other. Also, and I know this is nitpicking, but the couch and coffee table look like they're from IKEA or something. There isn't a whole lot else to say about the environment. There's a fake plant in the corner and some weird banner over the fireplace. Also, some of the stuff on the coffee table is overturned, hinting that something may have gone down in this room before the outbreak. The focal point of the room is the shotgun mounted on the wall. Take it from its resting place and this happens. The shotgun was weighing down the hooks, but as for what that means, I guess we'll find out pretty soon. The shotgun's got a fairly interesting history in the Resident Evil series. There's this risk-reward thing going on with obtaining the first shotgun in many of the mainline games. In RE2, if you stick around to kill the 4 zombies attacking the gun shop owner, you can pick up his shotgun. If you fight your way down into the underground room Brad ran out of in Resident Evil 3, you can find a shotgun there too. In RE4, you can find the first shotgun in the second area of the game, mounted on the wall just like this one. Entering the house it's found in will trigger a cutscene and spawn a mini-boss of sorts, Dr. Salvador. In all 4 games, the shotgun can be found very early on, but it requires a bit of bravery on the player's part to obtain it. The shotgun puzzle in this game is also revisited in RE7. The only inspiration I can think of for this room is the parlour from Bates Motel in Psycho. It's a bit of a stretch, but I feel good about it because there are elements of the set design that show up in other areas of the mansion. I think that's all I want to say on the parlour. There isn't much to really draw from the camera angles. They're wide shots situated from above, so you get a great view of the room and your place within it at any given time. There are no enemies here, but if there were, it wouldn't be as scary as, say, the hallway we just came from.
Hey, what's going on?
Jill? Is that you, Jill? What happened?
Barry, help me please. The door won't open. Quick!
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down.
Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life. But Barry, didn't you say you're going back to the dining room to do some research? Why on earth are you here?
I just had something I wanted to check. Now, let's get back to searching for the lost captain and Chris, shall we?
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah.
You know, in all the times I've played through either version of this game, I've never seen that cutscene. I first triggered the trap as Chris, so I just had to complete the puzzle as intended, and ever since then I've just skipped the room until I found the broken shotgun. When you head on back through the high-ceilinged room, a trap triggers. Remember the mount we took the shotgun from? Turns out removing the shotgun primes the ceiling trap. We're getting ahead of ourselves a touch, but what you're actually meant to do is come back here with the broken shotgun that you'll find later on, and pull an Indiana Jones so the trap doesn't trigger. That said, if you do trigger the trap as Jill, you end up with the shotgun anyway, so no harm, no foul. You just won't be able to re-enter the parlour, which is no great loss. I've got to be honest, I found this cutscene a little anticlimactic. I had known about it for so long before I had seen it myself, so maybe it was just overhyped in my mind. But there's so much goofy shit in this game that this one moment doesn't really stand out to me. The falling ceiling seems to be a pretty stock trap in fiction, but I can't figure out neither the origins nor any particular thing this room could be referencing. Maybe Indiana Jones? I get Death Star trash compactor vibes from it, but it's definitely not referencing that. The earliest examples I could find were The Iron Shroud by William Mudford and one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. If I had to take a stab at it, I'd say it wasn't directly influenced by anything.
It's Forrest. Oh my God.
There is something that always bugged me about the ceiling trap. First, let's take a look at the room's location on the map. Now, let's overlay the second floor map over it. It's directly beneath the stuffed deer room and the lesson room. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves yet again, but look at the east staircase. The distance from the first floor to the second is lower than the ceiling trap. So how does it work? There'd have to be some kind of hydraulic mechanism in there too, which would take up a lot of space somewhere in the building. Honestly, it's probably just an oversight on the part of the developers, but I do have a theory for this one. We don't ever really get a clear look at how high the ceiling is. It could be that the ceiling isn't actually that high up, and it's just that the room is lit in such a way as to make it seem like it goes up forever. As for the mechanism, I'm no engineer, but the falling ceiling doesn't have to be that thick, and the mechanism doesn't have to be directly above it. So maybe there's like a pulley system in the walls around it that lowers it down once the trap is triggered. I doubt it. This is just one of those things we're meant to accept and not really think too hard about. If it was a test, then I failed. But why is this room even here? Well, I've got theories about that too. It could simply be there for the STARS members to overcome during the BOW field test, but it could be that the trap is used for a more sinister, discreet purpose. The room could be used as a way to kill off people somewhat discreetly. For example, let's say a hiker got lost in the woods and stumbled across the mansion. Maybe an Umbrella employee lets them in, feeds them some bullshit like a helicopter's on the way or something, then ushers them into the parlor for tea while they wait. Now, the hiker might not have seen anything, but maybe seeing the mansion itself is too much, and they don't want to risk the word getting out. The employee plies the hiker with tea. The hiker eventually needs to rock a piss, so the employee tells them the bathroom's at the other end of the hall, through the door on the left. As soon as the hiker leaves, the employee removes the shotgun from the mount, locking the hiker in the high-ceilinged room and setting off the trap. The employee chills in the room, listening to the screams, and when they stop, puts the shotgun back and cleans the mess. Not traumatized at all. Now, that particular situation is very unlikely. Even if a hiker stumbled upon the mansion, it'd be easier to just send them on their way or whatever. The mansion would have to be known in town to some degree. But say a housekeeper saw too much, or an Umbrella employee was having doubts. I wouldn't put it past Wesker to invite them into the parlor for stogies and whiskey or something. That's all just speculation though. I honestly doubt the room had that much thought put into it. There's one last thing I want to touch on before we call it. Barry saving Jill was an unbelievably lucky coincidence. Jill asks him why he's here on the other side of the mansion, and we don't get any real answer. I don't know how much Barry knows about the situation, so I don't want to say he knew about the ceiling trap. As for why he was on this side of the mansion, I think he was doing what he could to protect Jill without it looking like he was following her or anything. In a sense, he's kinda playing both sides. He needs Wesker to think he's not interfering, and at the same time, he can't let Jill know he's working with Wesker. Maybe he heard the windows break and followed the trail, hearing Jill's voice in the high-ceilinged room as he walked down the corridor. Honestly, that's the best answer I can come up with. I doubt he'd know enough about the mansion to know what to look for, in terms of things like the emblem or the keys or whatever. So I think he was just doing his best to help Jill while also keeping his distance from her. If he were to stick by her side the entire time, Wesker would quickly wise up to his plan, and his family would be the ones that paid the price. Barry gets a bit of shit, but honestly, I think he did a pretty good job under those circumstances. Episode 4 is in the proverbial bag. Thank you all so much for your patience. I know it's been a while, and I'm truly grateful that anyone watches this weird channel. It was a combination of burnout, being pretty busy with work, and being pretty sick that kept this video from coming out sooner. And honestly, now that it's here and done, I think I overcooked it a little bit. It is what it is. Anyway, the next 3 episodes are well underway, as are a ton of other videos and projects I've been cooking up with what little free time I've had lately. I don't really have much else to say. I love this game, and once again, I really am grateful for all of you. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and catch you in the next one.